Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all enjoyed First Man. And listen, that's how we roll at a SAG-AFTRA Foundation Q&A. And we're about to have a great one right now. So let's bring out this amazing cast and this amazing director. Starting, he played Gus Grissom. Please welcome Shea Whigham. Playing Elliot C. Patrick Fugit. Playing Pat White, Olivia Hamilton. He is Michael Collins, Lukas Haas. Maybe you know this next gentleman as the Oscar-winning director of La La Land, Damien Chazelle. This next actress, she is an Emmy winner. She is a SAG Award winner. Please welcome Claire Foy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not worthy. Please welcome Academy Award nominee, SAG Award nominee, Ryan Gosling. Good to see you. I'm going to start at the end because I have to know, and I know everybody in this audience who just saw this incredible movie is wondering, that bit with the bracelet, Karen's bracelet. Right? Yeah. How did that happen? Damien. Ryan.
Damien Ryan. I personally believe it happened. It's a matter of debate. No one knows for certain. It's something that was a conjecture in the book that we based the movie on, Jim Hansen's biography of Neil, and an idea that I think that historian got from Neil's sister, who actually, ironically, was one of the people closest to him in his life. I think she's sort of optimistic. She kind of refers to it as, I'm not sure if he did, but I'd like to think that he did. What we do know for certain that I kind of found fascinating is that, for as famous as the moonwalk was, and as planned as it was, Neil, who was not a guy, as you see in the movie, he was not a guy who tended to just kind of do unrehearsed things, go off book completely and disappear. And he basically went off to this crater near the Lem, Little West crater, for an unscripted, unplanned 10-minute time by himself, basically, to the point to which actually he had to hurry back to get to the Lem in time for them to, to lift off and not leave him on the moon. So he. And it's a part of the moonwalk that is basically the least famous part of those 2 hours that Neil and Buzz spent on the moon, is this time that Neil, not on comms, with no communications, stood alone by himself for 10 minutes at this crater. No one really knows for sure. He never answered for sure what he did while there. We know he brought certain personal items, and each astronaut had a PPK, personal preference kit, which they would use to bring personal items with them. He never disclosed what those were. He left that blank on his manifest. So I think, and I think whatever I think if he did, leave something of Karen's on the moon, as his sister likes to think he did, I believe that he would never tell anyone. I believe that would be something he would keep to himself for all time.
Ryan, I want to ask, the first time you guys got together to talk, to meet, to talk about doing a film together, it was initially for First Man, and then you kind of got a little distracted with something else. What happened in that conversation?
By the way, are these the lights you used as the sun on the moon? I can't see a goddamn thing. I can't see anything. There literally could be just one row of people here, and I would believe that.
It's just the first 5 rows.
There's really no good reason for that, other than to intimidate me, and it's working.
What was the question?
The question was, when I first met Damien, I actually tapped him on the shoulder at the restaurant, and he looked at me like he was gonna fight me. And it was tense for a second, and I thought, we're either gonna fight or we're gonna make movies together. And I'm glad it turned out for the latter. We were meeting about First Man. There was no screenplay at that point. He had this musical to make. And we ended up talking more about Gene Kelly than Neil Armstrong, which I didn't expect. But, in the little brief period that we did talk about the film, I was immediately transported from the restaurant we were in, and suddenly I was tucked under the wing of a B-52 bomber and something called an X-15, and I was being shot into the atmosphere, and I just had this really visceral experience just from the way he was describing it, and it just was very clear that he was onto something, that he had a very clear vision for this, and that he would get there, and that I would be very lucky to be part of it.
I gotta talk about that visceral feel. That word visceral has been used to describe this movie for the last, month and a half since it first premiered at Venice and then Telluride, Toronto. And, with regards to movies and TV shows about the space race, you have From the Earth to the Moon, the HBO series, which is fantastic. You have Apollo 13. You have The Right Stuff, of course. But Damien, what you and Josh Singer, screenwriter, Oscar-winning screenwriter of Spotlight, what you did with this film is you effectively stripped the space race of the gloss, of the polish, and made it like you don't just watch First Man, you feel it. You feel how dangerous it is. I mean, what was the motive behind doing something that was so fundamentally different from anything else that's ever been done about the space race?
Well, I liked the idea of locking Ryan into a tiny capsule the size of, and then shaking it super wildly. But all joking aside, I mean, in a way, that's kind of what we did. It was a practical in-camera approach. We didn't want to rely on green screen. We wanted to try to sort of do it the mechanical way, sort of like the way they did it at NASA. I mean, I think for me, it was right at it was one of the first things I think Ryan and I probably talked about, and Claire and I talked about, and everyone who's here with me and I talked about was, and I think it was something they all got to see. We all got to see firsthand when going to NASA and going to see some of these old spacecrafts. It's just, I think it's easy to forget how insanely dangerous these missions were, how much people were acting outside of what they knew for sure would happen. They were saying, we're going to go to the moon before they had the technology to do it. They were figuring it out as they went along. Each craft was an evolution from the one before, and each craft was a prototype, so everything was a test. Every pilot was a guinea pig, essentially. They were always skirting on that edge of death in a way that I think, you talk about the gloss, I think NASA purposefully wanted to feed into that gloss because it needed public funding. It needed to keep the American public into it or into it enough to keep it alive. And so I think a lot of the deaths and the near deaths and the mishaps and the failures on the road to success, I think, have gotten sort of forgotten maybe. And so I think that was one of the big things we wanted to communicate with the movie was the danger and the cost.
Yeah, for Patrick and for Shea, like what were some of the things that you learned about the dangers of the space race of the 60s in particular, because that's really was the big push, that you maybe didn't have that knowledge before you started filming, and also like the sort of training that you did to play real life characters? Shea.
We started in Houston for 3 days. You can intellectualize it to a certain point, but then And that helped enormously to really drop all of us in, I believe, Houston and then Canaveral. And you picked up little things. That's what I'm always looking for, is to try to play opposites and look for things that you might not think of. And that really was helpful for all the boys to get together in an organic process. And you don't have to force things. There's nothing worse than that, I find. And we all were able to do that. And I mean, I lost my life, he lost his life. That's how dangerous it is, you know? So it became pretty apparent when we started looking into that and talking to the people that knew these guys, you know. And
Yeah, Patrick, about going off on Shea's comment about how both of your characters lost their lives, what kind of, I don't want to say responsibility does that bring, because I think that's pretty obvious, but how much are you able to inject of yourself into a role of a real-life character who's hasn't been with us for some time?
One of the really nice elements of Elliot C's role in the film is the role that he plays in Neil's life and in the perspective about the loss and the cost of the program, because, you know, Gus perished in a pretty well-known accident, but Elliot perished in a plane crash on the way to training, and it was like, you know, these guys were flying coast to coast multiple times a day to do training events, and that in itself is quite hazardous. So, you know, because it wasn't part of a mission, it's not talked about, and so Damien's done a lovely job, I think, of bringing that to light and how hazardous it was for those guys. But also, there wasn't a lot of material on Elliot C for me to view, so I think a lot of it was me and Damien injecting as much rapport as we could between Neil and Elliot. So it felt like when Neil loses Elliot, you know, the audience also loses something.
You know, Ryan, I got to ask you, so Neil Armstrong, you know, I've read so many books about the space race, and including the one that this is based on, and seen so many movies and documentaries, and, you know, it's common, at least to the public, that Neil Armstrong, he wasn't like the warm and fuzzy type. You know, he was very private, at least to the public. I mean, to his family, it was different. But so to play someone who was so fearless, someone who was a hero, and someone who was so well known, but someone who was so private, what was your point of connection, or your points of connection for you to get the character?
I've never had more help on a film, and you know, whether it was Neil and Janet's sons, or getting to meet Janet, or, you know, friends, family, coworkers, just incredible situation where it felt like all hands on deck. Everyone was just there to help or share any small detail that they thought might help in some way. But we had an opportunity to go to the farm where Neil was born. We sat in the room he was born in, and we spoke to his sister June. And I couldn't say exactly why that was so helpful, but there just was really something about that trip to Wampakoneta and spending time where he grew up, looking out at the cornfields that he grew up looking out at, out of his window. And his sister June, you know, it was really special meeting. She even sort of, you know, acted him out for me in their living room. She embodied him, and she told me how he would be watching me right now if he was sitting in this chair. And wow. It was really special.
You know, to play Janet, you know, I love the scenes where Janet she's listening to the box. You know, she's listening to Gemini 8, and she's telling her kids, say, you know, come here, give me the box, go to your room. I mean, like, what a balance of being, you know, strong for her husband and being a mom. You know, so what kind of preparation? I don't know if you got a chance to actually meet Janet, but to capture that essence of the duality of Janet Armstrong.
No, I never got to meet Janet, which I'll always regret. I think that was the interesting thing that, when Josh obviously spent so much time with her, with the boys, that she wasn't a one-dimensional character. There were like facets to her personality that wouldn't necessarily, just help the film. She wasn't there to help Neil's story, or she wasn't there to sort of serve some purpose. She had to be Jan. That's all she could be, and that's what Josh wrote. And then when I got the chance to kind of listen to all the tapes of when Ryan and Damien met her, and the original tapes of when Jim Hansen, who wrote the book, had first interviewed her, and you just got such a strong sense of that there was no messing around. So I was like, right, I can't mess around. Like, I can't try and make her anything other than she is, really. And she was able to hold it all in the palm of her hand the whole time. She was able to be a mother and a wife and a friend and a really valued member of the community. And, she probably never thought about herself during that entire time. But she was able just to go, no, it's all right, I can do it. And she did.
Lukas, someone asked about, the spacesuit. You got to wear, I mean, obviously you did too. But first of all, wearing the spacesuit, filming the scenes in the command module, all the scenes in all the spacecraft, whether it's the X-15, Gemini 8, and, the command module of Apollo 11 is, especially wearing that bulky suit, first of all, how cool was it to wear that? But also, what was it like to film the scenes in the cockpit wearing that thing?
I mean, it was kind of like, when you're a kid and you want to be an astronaut and you wonder what it's like,
Yeah.
You sort of, all of a sudden you put this thing on, it's really, really heavy, and you're kind of just in your own world because you can't hear anybody else. All you hear is like, shh, it's like the air coming into your helmet. You can't scratch an itch. You can't and you get strapped. They strap you in really tight. I mean, I was strapped into this thing, and the control panel's right here in front of you, and each of us was like squished up next to each other, and we were like that for hours. And you just, there are moments where you start to almost panic. I mean, I did at least. I was, it was, claustrophobic. So. And Damien had this massive LED screen, so we could kind of see what was happening. And rather than it being a green screen, you could see, I saw the Earth go by as we were taking off, and I got completely disoriented. I had to look out the window just to find my bearings and see the set, and everybody was still there. All right. And then, when you're sitting in there for hours, I couldn't help but just think about Mike and what he was actually thinking at the time. And I can't tell you what he was thinking, but it was a very introspective, really cool experience.
There's a point during this isn't really a question, but a point during the Apollo 11 mission when the command module, when Buzz and Neil were on the moon, and Mike Collins goes through loss of signal on the other side of the moon. He truly was completely alone in the universe. Not a question, just a comment, little existential. But, I want to ask about the astronaut boot camp. What was that like for you guys, Shea, and for Patrick, too?
I mean, it was really cool. We didn't really learn anything about, orbital mechanics or rocket physics or anything like that, but we got to play with all their stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, we got to drive the Mars rover, which they probably shouldn't have done.
Oh.
Yeah. They probably should not have let actors do that. You got it stuck, didn't you?
I got it stuck.
They're like,
somehow.
you can't get this thing stuck no matter what, and he gets it stuck in like 5 minutes.
Olivia, I want to ask about Pat White. So Ed White, she first American to do the EVA on Gemini 4, and then he dies in a fire. And like obviously like LC's wife, but he was a hero because of that first EVA, and he was on Apollo 1, which was Apollo 1. That was a big deal. So what kind of empathy did you sort of have for the astronaut wives, especially like the way she had to put on a brave face when talking to Jan?
I had a lot of empathy for her. I went down to Dallas, as Ryan was mentioning, we had a ton of support for the film by the actual families of the characters we were playing. So I got to speak to her children who went through, a lot as a result of the space program. Bonnie was 10 years old when they lost Ed, and then her mom passed away, 10, 15 years later. And she hasn't talked about this or explored this part of her life in a while, but and no one at work really knows, who she is and who her dad is. But she opened up and shared a lot about what that was like for her and for her mother. And what amazed me was I kind of probed her about what it was like, before Ed passed, of, if her mother had apprehension about what he was doing or was frustrated or resentful or scared. And it amazed me that she said no, like her mother never showed a crack of doubt or lack of support. She was completely on the team, completely sharing in the mission with her husband. And so I think, he was her whole world for her. And when he passed, I think she didn't know who she was anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like, her identity was to be the wife, and without the husband, now what? But I want to ask Damien and Ryan. I remember we were talking backstage at the Hollywood Bowl. We were talking about Gemini 8 and about the tumbling in of her end. And by the way, a lot of that dialogue, like during that mission and during the Apollo 1, and like that was actual dialogue. Josh took it word for word. But what was behind the decision? How did you film Gemini 8? Like, take me through just that process of keeping it all confined to the capsule, not show. You didn't see it launch. Everything was from your point of view. What was it like to film that, especially because it was so claustrophobic, and with the vibrations and everything? Yeah, you go first.
It'll be more interesting if Damien takes this one. They just shook me around a lot. That's all I could offer to this particular question. But Damien, you could speak to your vision.
That mission is a prime example in a way of again, stuff that, crazy stuff that is not kind of widely discussed or well known about the space program at that time. If you talk to people at, and we got to talk to some of the people at Mission Control who remember that mission, and to them, I remember them telling me, that felt like the closest we ever got to losing an astronaut in space, even closer than Apollo 13. This was the biggest near disaster where we really thought they were done for. And getting to talk to Dave Scott, who was the pilot with Neil in the capsule, and he said to me and Josh point blank, "Yep, if it weren't for that one split second where Neil flicked the RCS switch, I'd be a satellite right now." It was that close, but again, I think the moon landing kind of has such a glow that it obscures some of those near catastrophes or full out catastrophes before it. We wanted to shoot it in a way where you felt like you were in that capsule. The one angle that we do of an exterior, which is the camera mounted to the craft, pointed out, that's just kind of our replication of the archival footage that exists. You can go on YouTube, search Gemini 8, and you'll see that same angle of the Agena splitting off and the craft starting to spin, and it doesn't look very fun. But it's just one little sliver, obviously. So we relied a lot on, I think, talking to Dave Scott, who was in that mission, and talking to and also in terms of what was going on the ground, talking to Janet, talking to people in Mission Control, just trying to figure out sort of what they remembered and what it might have been like, and then and then we shook Ryan very violently.
Ryan, as far as like the scenes where Neil is being shaken violently in the X-15 and Gemini, and even even the Apollo 11 launch. So just to give an idea, just like the moment that captures just how fearless Armstrong is and was. So it's the launch and it's shaking like crazy, and it's Armstrong was just like, we're go, clock is running. Roger, Houston. Like his voice doesn't shake at all. He doesn't scream over the vibrations at all. I mean, did you feel an urge to want to do that because you were the one actually shaking? I mean, or did you have to be like, WWND? What would Neil do?
Can we get that in a bracelet? Yeah, it was. I never knew how dangerous these missions were, how limited the technology was that they were working with, how small these capsules were. They called them spam in a can for a reason. Just how everything they were flying was essentially a prototype, that they were replacing the nuclear payload on missiles and just with people, just firing them into the atmosphere, and they were coming home and mowing the lawn and taking out the trash, and it's just the extreme of the extremes of their life is just really hard to imagine. And in terms of the mission, when you listen, as you mentioned before, a lot of the dialogue from the missions is pulled directly from the comms, and in some cases you can listen to them, and it just sounds like a real casual flight, and then when you're put into the situation, you're saying that same dialogue, but you're experiencing what they experienced. It's just night and day from what you're hearing, Yeah. And it was actually, if there was something difficult, was to try and do it casually, just because what was happening was so extreme. But that's a testament to the way that Damien shot the film, because outside of our window was an LED screen, so we didn't have a green screen, or he actually built these things onto a gimbal, so like we're properly shaking. And I mean, most of you are actors, right?
They're all actors.
So it's like almost everyone else would put a green screen out the window and have you just go like this. But I encourage you all to work with Damien, because he won't make you do that.
One of my favorite scenes in the film, Claire and Ryan, is when you're packing. You're just packing. I mean, it's like you come home after almost losing your life on the simulator, the LEM simulator, and you come home. Oh yeah, I got to go back out to the office. And Jan, she's just like, oh, hello. So that scene where Janet just gets to unload on Neil, but no, you get the hell in there and talk to your kids. I think that's a very, very powerful scene. I love that scene. But I just want to tell us about filming that scene, because that's really where, as actors, you really just got to let loose.
It was a long night. It was a long, long night. It felt like a really long night to me. Was it a long night to you? It was a great night, but it was long. I think because we had known that had happened, because the boys, Rick and Mark, that was one of the things that they had been very clear about, that they'd sort of found themselves having this odd, sat at the dining room table where they never sat, ever, apart from at Christmas, with their dad opposite them, knowing that something very strange was going on. And we knew that Jan had, it wasn't necessarily Neil's intention to do that, and so she'd made him do it. And so it's about understanding how those two people who rarely communicate in that way were able to get to the point where they were being forced to make that happen. Like this was a very out of the ordinary experience, and so we sat down in the bedroom together and talked about it for a long time. I think I talked a lot because I was like, if I keep talking, then I won't have to do it, and I'm quite scared. And then we just sort of thrashed it out. We just sort of did it loads of times. but in a good way. But just to make sure that we mind it for all it was worth, because it really happened, you know. And I just think it's so important to kind of make sure you've done justice to that really happened, and those people really fought for that in their real lives. And so we just did it. I threw stuff.
You bled.
I bled in that scene. On my thumb. I was really proud of it.
Yeah, when we shot that scene, we shot it from the bedroom, packing all the way into the office, all in big, long takes, you know. So Damien would set it up so that we didn't have to chop it up. And we tried it every which way from Sunday. I think the only way we didn't try that scene was, like, in Spanish or something. We did it every way we could think to do it. It's part of why I love working with all of these actors and working with Damien, is because everybody was, you know, more than open to that, you know, willing to try anything, just, you know, and almost like in the spirit of what Neil says in the film, like, we have to fail down here so we don't fail up there. That spirit kind of permeated the experience of the film. You know, we started this film with a 2-week rehearsal process where, you know, we called it rehearsals, but we were, you know, sneakily shooting. And it was just us and a camera person. We were able to try out different, you know, work on our accents, mannerisms, costumes, dynamics, all of these things, you know. You know, a lot of that stuff worked its way into the film. But so by the time we got to a scene like that, Claire's talking about, you know, you really felt like there was a momentum to that, and you felt like you could try anything, and we did. And one of my favorite memories of sometimes Claire was so good in the scene, I had to remind myself that I wasn't watching the movie. And I had to go, yeah, no, she needs me to say something now, I think. But she was so great in that scene. It was just such a pleasure to be a part of that, to watch her work. And I'll never forget when we were sure we were done, we were saying goodnight, and Damien was like, "That was great, you guys, thanks so much." We almost kind of hugged it out, and then he was like, "Let's just do one more." I'll never forget Claire's face. It was one of my favorite. My heart took a picture of Claire's face. And then she nailed it again.
Wow, bravo. So we take this is, yes, SAG-AFTRA Foundation. So everybody, they write questions down, and I read them, which is awesome. And Matthew Artson, I want to apologize because I already asked your question, but I'm going to give you the shout out because you did write out this question about, you know, like we're talking to the families and everything. So Craig and G, for Damien, questions for you, sir. How did you film the weightless space scenes?
Well, you know, and certainly, I mean, I think Ryan and Lukas can speak to this maybe even better. I mean, we sort of did it the old-fashioned way, you know? We did it with, they were on wires sometimes. Other times we, you know, I mean, it sounds funny saying it, but, you know, Lukas and Ryan both had to get very good at the, you know, at the sort of, you know, that kind of thing. And
that was pretty good, Damien.
Oh, thanks. I was rehearsing that.
If we could just do it one more time.
But yeah, I mean, you had to.
There was one scene where I was like, I had a bunch of lines where he's about to go out in the LEM and go down to the moon, and I'm freaking out, and I thought the take was really good, and Damien's like, it was great, but could you weren't floating quite enough. You can just float a little more. So I'm like, okay, I'll float, dude. Just like the whole time doing the scene.
It's weirdly, yeah, tricky, but
we would watch each other and go like, "Oh, how's he floating? His floating's better than my floating. Oh, he's pushing off. That's a good thing. I should be pushing. I'm not pushing off enough. He's doing the 1 foot. The 1 foot's the way to go." Corey Stoll at one point brought in an Apple box so he could play with his levels, and I was like, "That's smart. That's."
Wow.
I never thought of the
But
apple
you guys
box.
also, you got to, I wasn't part of the, I was jealous to not be a part of it. I wasn't part of the space camp when you guys kind of trained, but I remember they put you on sort of the Argos system or something where you get a little sense of...
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the really cool things we got to do at NASA was they all kinds of like weightless simulators. There was one that sort of simulated the weight of that you would be on the moon, and there was one that was the Argos thing where you get latched up, they weigh you, and then you're just in this space. It's like a massive, massive thing. I don't even know how to explain it, but you just sort of touch like here and you go flying off. You have to like, it really gives you a sense of what that's like. So that was one of the cool things we got to do.
You know, this is a fun question from Jennifer Devona. Was space travel being possible, and especially now that you've made the movie, and you see how, I mean, the movie, more than any other film about space travel, you really feel and see how dangerous it was. If you could go into space, would you?
No.
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 I would, yeah.
Yes! Yes! Olivia? Yeah, really? Okay, cool. Yes, Patrick?
Absolutely.
All right, Shea?
Hell no.
Oh, another good question. This one is from Blake. Okay, this is a method question. So when you're making a film that is so fundamentally different, like this is, you have days of doubt, you know, as to what your performance is going to be that day, or just you have moments of insecurity. Like, what do you do to get through those moments? Let's start with you and go down the line, Ryan.
It's just specific to this film?
No, just in general. In general.
Well,
Or
let's keep it to this film.
Yeah.
no, I think, you know, again, this is what's one of the things that's great about working with Damien is that he's created an environment that's just very inspiring, and where everyone is pushing themselves, and no one person sort of wants to be the weak link, because no one's working harder than him, and everyone is inspired by that. And for instance, everything on this film, from recreating the Armstrongs' house, to scale, both of their houses, and also the cabin, to the cabins being the capsules being identical to what they would be, to having people on set who have been to the moon. At one point, I think we had 3 people who'd been to the moon at some point, who could tell you exactly what that felt like at any given time. Always somebody there who'd lived the experience of your character, or who had been directly involved with it in some way. So you never feel like you're doing it on your own, or that your job, there's having Neil's sons or his sister or everything. It just, or Jim Hansen, who wrote the book, on set every day. It just was, everything a director could do to make sure you had everything available to you. So if you ever were in doubt of something, there was someone there to help you. So.
How about for you, Claire? The moments where you had doubt on this film.
Oh, God. I mean, you just have to breathe in and out, don't you? Someone once told me at drama school that if a scene, especially on stage, if it's going badly, just stop and go, and then normally that sorts things out. Because it's normally because you're going, I'm so tense and I'm really pushing it and I'm really trying to make something happening, it's not happening. And that feeling when you're sort of trying to make yourself cry or something, and it's just not, you're like, I'm not having any feelings and this is never going to work. And so you become so tense that it's just not going to happen. That's mainly what I do, is just breathe in and out. And know eventually it'll end. Whether they'll fire you and just go, please get off set because you're terrible. Or you'll go home to bed that night. They're not going to keep you there forever.
Breathing is a good thing. Breathing, but even as a director, Damien, for you, like when you have moments of doubt, like if you start having in your head, like for months, how you're going to do a scene, and then you get to the day where you're going to film that scene, and you get to that, like, oh shit, what do I do? Like, do you ever have that?
Well, certainly all the every day, every minute. But I think I mean, on this movie, one thing that was special for me about working on this movie that was different than movies I'd done in the past, you know, because we wanted it to feel like sort of almost as though you were watching a documentary. Everything had a sort of looseness to it, you know, and so which meant that everyone had to be kind of ready at the drop of a hat for whatever might happen. So, you know, whether it was the 2 weeks Ryan was talking about, that were basically 2 weeks of sort of improvised rehearsals, and you know, that you see many of which you see in the film. Or, you know, when we were doing scripted scenes, you know, we'd still try to have always have a whole live set. It was always the idea of 360 shooting, so there wouldn't be equipment or anything. That would all be kind of down the road or something, so that if the camera decided to, you know, turn around and Lukas is in another room, that he's doing something to character, and then, you know, we catch Olivia and we might turn around to Ryan and Clarke, and the kids are running around, that everyone sort of, and what's wonderful, I guess, for me is that there's no more collaborative way to work on set. So it really always felt like every day on set was a sort of dance between me, Linus, the DP, who was also operating, and these actors. So it was so kind of active and collaborative and based on their input and their ideas that it actually freed me up to not have to sort of be in my own head too much. So yeah.
How about you, Lukas?
Me, I'm still doubting like what I did. And, you know, I think it's kind of a natural part of being an actor and making art. And you always doubt. You just have to believe in yourself and keep going.
Great advice. How about you, Olivia?
I think I experienced the most doubt when I would show up and set at 9 a.m. and then things would get pushed, and I'd have like 6 hours to just wait and imagine. You know, sorry, it didn't happen a lot. Usually it was very on time. but you know, you're like, you start overthinking everything, and then you get in your head, and that's like the worst for me. So I would start bringing like period films, like etiquette things, anything to get me out of my head but keep me in period, because I didn't want to distract myself with like, you know, Modern Family or something that was of this time period. So yeah, I just would try to not think for as long as possible.
Patrick. I'd love to see
I mean, like Claire said, there's always time to take a breath. But it's also like, it's really awesome if you can be prepared enough and be part of a production structure that's prepared enough that you just come to set with ideas. Like if you have a doubt or if there's a problem going, it's like your mind telling you that there's something missing or that there's a problem or at least that there's a question about it. And if you have a structure where you can answer those questions, or Damien can answer those questions, which he's exceptional at doing, it's great, you know. And like for this film, it was pretty awesome. Like I really didn't have to do much. Damien was
Shea.
kind of handling it all.
I think to piggyback off of what he's saying, I mean, you have a generational filmmaker in Damien. He's as good as, I mean, out of the gate, he's 3 for 3. He's genius. He's brilliant. And I don't say that lightly. We've all been on sets. I've been with the best. We've all been with the best. And you're looking at the best that's out there, and he creates that for us.
Thank you, sir.
And I mean that. And then as any of you, when you start, or if you work on sets, it starts usually with the number one on the call sheet and how it's either going to go great or not. And Ryan is so generous, is so generous, and that's not always how it is, to a fault. And he would allow everyone else to have their moments. And you feel that. What you feel up there, I think, is experiential, and that's not always how it is on a film set. But there's a lot of love coursing through this thing, and I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
Well, just some perspective. So Alex Shepard went into space for 15 minutes in May of 1961, and just a little over 8 years later, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. That's a little over 8 years, and they didn't just create the spaceships and the rockets. They created the equipment to track the spaceships and the rockets. Everything came from scratch. And like you even used the letter that Nixon was going to read just in case Armstrong and Aldrin got stuck, which I think a lot of people watching the film probably are hearing those words for the first time, but that was actually a speech that was written just in case?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you can find it online, you know, if you search an event of moon disaster. Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, one thing about that speech is that it's obviously chilling, you know, for the obvious reasons to read it and to know that they were that prepared for that outcome. But there's also this tremendous beauty in it that you can't deny, and just, you know, in some of the language, you know, that this idea that now I'm forgetting the exact wording, but this part of the speech where they talk about, you know, from now on, when anyone looks at the moon, we'll know that there's some corner of another world that is forever mankind. You know, it sort of feels like, in a way, that kind of encapsulates NASA, because it was this mixture of sort of, you know, almost mythic kind of vision and ambition, but also a real grappling with the less desirable things in life. You know, a real grappling with just the cost of this, the brutality of it, the proximity to death, you know, that it requires. And so those two things, I think, this kind of reaching outward, but dealing with such often tragedy on the ground. I think you see that running through all of NASA at that time. Most of all the astronauts, of course, they were the ones paying with their lives. And I think Neil just happened to be right at the center of that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the beauty of this film, the visceral feel of it, the danger of it all, in terms of doing something, capturing a film that was so fundamentally different, so beautifully acted, mission accomplished.
Thank you, Stoll.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.